The air was thick with anticipation as news spread that Sam Harris, the renowned rationalist philosopher and podcast host, had extended a public invitation to Joel Osteen, the celebrated pastor, television preacher, and businessman. Not for a friendly discussion, not for a casual chat, no, for a public intellectual debate on his own podcast platform. Let's see if the voice of faith can handle some real scrutiny, Sam had stated during his opening remarks on an earlier episode, drawing cheers from his intellectually inclined listeners. Producers loved it. Viewers craved it. Sam Harris was the master of logical deconstruction, the champion of scientific inquiry. Few faith leaders dared step onto his platform without leaving intellectually challenged. But Joel Osteen wasn't like the others. When the invite reached his office in Houston, Claire read it aloud, skepticism clear in her voice. "He wants you live, no edits," she said. "It's a trap." Joel Osteen leaned back in his chair, considering. "Good," he said, a slow smile forming. "Let's embrace it." Joel Osteen's inner circle had mixed feelings. Some warned him not to legitimize Sam Harris's purely secular platform. Others saw an opportunity. "If you can hold your ground," Claire whispered, "you won't just survive, you'll inspire." Joel Osteen nodded, resolve hardening. This wasn't just about defending himself. It was about standing for everyone mocked, belittled, and erased for their beliefs by a culture that thought intellectual dismissals replaced spiritual truth. He prepared carefully, not with sharp retorts, not with personal attacks, but with spiritual truths, calming assurances, and an unshakable belief in good. The night arrived faster than anyone expected. The conference hall stage gleamed under blinding lights. Audience members packed in, primed to witness the intellectual dismantling of the naive faith leader who thought he could keep up with Sam. Backstage, Joel Osteen adjusted his suit and touched the small lapel pin of a dove. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. "Remember," Claire said softly as she handed Joel Osteen a thin file, "truth in spirit wins. Stay calm. Remind them of the quiet yearning of the soul." Joel Osteen smiled faintly and stepped toward the stage. Sam Harris waited, seated behind his wide desk, a sharp analytical gaze fixed on the entrance. As he entered, the audience burst into a mixture of cheers and curious anticipation. The trap was set, but Joel Osteen wasn't walking into it. He was about to turn it against him. Sam Harris wasted no time. The moment Joel Osteen sat across from him, the intellectual jabs began. Sharp, practiced, cutting. "So," Sam probed, leaning into the microphone, "do you consult with your spiritual advisors before you speak? Or do you simply channel the divine?" The audience murmured with intellectual amusement, the familiar rhythm of his podcast rolling like thunder. Joel Osteen smiled lightly, not sarcastic, not defensive, just amused, as if he had already anticipated this predictable opening. "No divine channeling," he said calmly, "but thanks for reminding everyone how predictable this setup is." The audience chuckled nervously, not because of a punchline, but because they weren't used to seeing someone not take Sam's bait. Sam Harris arched an eyebrow. He shifted gears fast, moving from jests to philosophical challenges. "You preach about a benevolent God, Pastor Osteen," he said, "when suffering and irrationality plague the world, and you expect us to take your optimistic platitudes seriously?" Joel Osteen leaned in slightly. "Millions have found hope and purpose through faith, Harris," he corrected coolly. "Their transformed lives are public. The spiritual facts are public." He paused, letting the silence hang uncomfortably. Sam Harris tried again, reaching for a logical conclusion. "Yes, by offering platitudes about prosperity that ignore the material suffering of millions." Joel Osteen didn't flinch. "By lifting spirits for struggling individuals," he said, voice steady, "inspiring acts of charity and compassion, building communities of shared purpose." The audience was quiet. No laughter, no sarcasm, just spiritual truths delivered with precision. Sam Harris looked momentarily thrown off, but quickly recovered, waving dismissively. "You people love cherry-picking anecdotes," he said, "but reality isn't a revival." Joel Osteen smiled again, that same maddening, patient smile. "Reality," he said, "is what millions of Americans live every day, not what's edited into a soundbite for intellectual applause." The audience shifted, some exchanging glances. This wasn't the intellectual bloodbath they had been promised. This was something else, something they hadn't seen in a long time. A faith leader who refused to fold under pressure. Sam Harris leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. "Fine," he said, voice dripping with mockery. Let's talk reality. Let's talk about the long history of religious violence and dogma. You want to defend that too? He thought he had him cornered. He thought this was the knockout blow. But Joel Osteen's eyes didn't waver. He sat up straighter, his voice low but powerful. I'll defend genuine faith. I'll never defend fanaticism. And I'll never apologize for people having the right to seek spiritual meaning. He looked directly into the camera. Even when people like you tell them to shut up and listen to pure reason. The audience gasped softly. Sam Harris opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out because deep down he knew. For the first time on his platform, he was losing control. Sam Harris wasn't used to losing the rhythm of his own discourse. For years, he had controlled the room with intellectual rigor, flattening opponents with a few sharp logical blows, letting the crowd's agreement carry him to victory. But tonight felt different. Joel Osteen wasn't just surviving, he was reversing the current. Sam Harris tapped his pen anxiously against the desk, forcing a tight smile. All right, he said, voice a bit higher pitched than usual. You want to sound serious? Let's talk serious. He leaned forward dramatically. You promote positive thinking when millions are suffering from the harm caused by dogmatic adherence to outdated texts, he said. How do you sleep at night, Pastor Osteen? The audience erupted into claps and cheers, sensing a heavy blow had been delivered. Joel Osteen waited patiently for the noise to die down. He didn't rush. He didn't fumble. When the room finally settled, he spoke calm, measured. I sleep knowing that guiding people to live responsibly isn't cruelty, it's compassion. And I sleep knowing that faith inspires individuals to build better lives, just as secular frameworks encourage civic duty. A visible ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Sam Harris's face twitched. He hadn't expected him to pivot so cleanly or to expose the intellectual double standard so effortlessly. He tried another angle. You people love playing the blame game, he said, jabbing his finger at him, attributing everything to divine will, but you never own up to the intellectual inconsistencies of faith. Joel Osteen met his accusation head on. No spiritual journey is perfect, he said simply. But pretending humanity's deepest questions began with modern philosophy is intellectual myopia, something I thought you opposed. The jab was subtle but lethal. Sam Harris's audience, trained to agree with easy targets, found themselves uneasy, unsure when they were supposed to react. Sam Harris knew he needed to pivot fast. He leaned back in his chair and flashed his classic smug grin. So what are you really here for, Pastor Osteen? He asked. To promote your brand or to audition for a new megachurch? The murmurs of agreement rolled again, but thinner this time. Weaker. Joel Osteen didn't blink. I'm here, he said quietly, because people like you have spent decades dismissing the spiritual yearning of real Americans, and someone needs to remind you. Intellectual mockery isn't courage. Logical deconstruction isn't leadership. And cynicism doesn't solve anything. The room grew still. Sam Harris stared at him, a flicker of real anger passing behind his eyes. For the first time, it was obvious he was outmatched. Joel Osteen wasn't trying to be more rational than him. He wasn't playing his game. He had brought a different weapon entirely, one he wasn't prepared to fight. And worse, the audience was starting to notice. Sam Harris shifted in his seat, his trademark analytical smirk faltering for a split second. The audience could feel it. The master of logical deconstruction, wobbling, he tried to recover, leaning forward with an exaggerated casualness. Okay, he said, forcing a chuckle. So you're here to save humanity from reason. A few laughs scattered around the room, but it was clear the energy had changed. Joel Osteen, poised and steady, offered a small smile. Not from reason, he said, from people who think intellectual dismissals are a substitute for genuine understanding. The line landed hard. Sam Harris tried again, falling back on safer ground. He pulled out a note card, waving it theatrically. Your belief, he said, voice dripping with sarcasm, that prayer can cure illness, despite medical science. You still defending that? Another cheap shot. Another expected move. Joel Osteen didn't bite. He calmly leaned back and said, the often misconstrued words of a man who has guided millions to a life of hope and spiritual renewal, inspiring them to overcome challenges thought impossible. Silence. Even the liberal-leaning audience couldn't deny the impact of faith on personal resilience. Sam Harris's nostrils flared slightly. He pivoted once more. You're a man of faith, he said, changing tactics. You'll learn. The world's not as simple as your sermons make it sound. Joel Osteen's smile didn't waver. I know it's not simple, he said, but it's also not as hopeless as you sell it every episode. The blow was surgical. Not cruel, not loud, but devastating. The audience murmured. Not the intellectual agreement Sam Harris had built his empire upon, but something more dangerous. Doubt. For the first time, they were wondering if maybe, just maybe, Joel Osteen had a point. Sam Harris glanced at his producer, who frantically gestured for him to wrap up the segment early. He ignored it. He still believed he could salvage this. Still believed a well-timed intellectual jab could undo the damage. Still believed wrongly that Joel Osteen had brought a sermon to a philosophical debate. He hadn't realized he had brought spiritual truth, and that was something even pure reason couldn't kill. Sam Harris tapped the side of his water glass, a nervous tick he couldn't hide anymore. Joel Osteen sat poised, his hands neatly folded as if he had been expecting every move Sam made and was just patiently waiting for him to exhaust himself. The camera zoomed slightly closer. Viewers at home could feel it too. The atmosphere was shifting, and it wasn't shifting in Sam's favor. "So tell me," Sam said, forcing another grin, "how do you reconcile promoting belief in the supernatural when all evidence points to a purely material reality?" It was supposed to be the final blow. The audience leaned forward, desperate for the intellectual slam-dunk moment they were used to. Joel Osteen didn't flinch. He leaned in, his voice clear. "I reconcile it the same way humans reconcile searching for meaning in a chaotic world. Because life is complicated and spiritual progress is messy." He locked eyes with him. "And because critiquing faith from an academic platform," and he continued, "isn't the same as ministering to souls seeking meaning in their real lives." The crowd fell into a heavy silence. No intellectual agreement, no cheering, just the sound of spiritual truth settling like a heavy stone in the room. Sam Harris blinked, stunned. He tried to interrupt, but Joel Osteen pressed on. "My ministry didn't dismiss the suffering of others. It inspired countless individuals to unlock their potential and build stronger communities. It provided hope where there was despair. It taught forgiveness where there was bitterness." Each word was a hammer strike. Each point drove deeper into the narrative Sam Harris had built his brand on, and it was cracking. He chuckled nervously, trying to brush it off. "All right, fine," he said. "You've got your spiritual platitudes." Joel Osteen tilted his head slightly. "No," he said, his voice razor sharp. "I have spiritual reality. You have algorithms." The audience gasped. Some even laughed. Not at Joel Osteen, but with him. Sam Harris's mask slipped entirely for a moment. He wasn't the dominant host anymore. He was a man losing his audience and losing to a pastor, television preacher, and businessman who came armed only with faith and resolve. The producer motioned again from the wings. Cut to commercial. Sam Harris hesitated. For a moment, it looked like he might concede, but pride is a powerful thing. Sam Harris wasn't going down without swinging wildly. Even if all he had left were broken arguments and worn-out cynicism, Joel Osteen saw it, and he was ready because the real knockout wasn't a single blow. It was the slow, devastating realization playing out across America. Sam Harris's intellectual kingdom was crumbling, and Joel Osteen was the one holding the mirror. Sam Harris tried desperately to reclaim the rhythm. He leaned forward, forcing a chuckle that didn't quite land. "Come on," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "Isn't it cute? He thinks emotional appeals and positive affirmations rebuild the human spirit." A few loyal audience members laughed, but the sound was hollow, thin. The old magic was gone. Joel Osteen didn't even blink. He simply adjusted his tie, leaned slightly closer to the mic, and said, "Emotional appeals didn't rebuild the human spirit. Faith did. Hope did. And ordinary people, the ones whose spiritual journeys you dismiss every episode, did." His voice was calm, but his words hit like a battering ram. Sam Harris smiled wider, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "You sound like a self-help guru," he said. "The world's a little more complicated than oversimplified truisms." Joel Osteen nodded thoughtfully, as if he agreed. "It is complicated," he said, "but it's not so complicated that you can't tell spiritual truth from intellectual arrogance." He paused, his gaze steady. "Mocking faith isn't edgy. Sneering at hope isn't brave. And laughing at the spiritual needs of hardworking Americans doesn't make you wise." The room was dead silent. Even the cameraman froze, unsure whether to zoom in or stay still. Sam Harris shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He reached for another note card. Anything. But his fingers fumbled slightly, betraying the sweat forming on his palms. He tried again. "You really think faith is the answer to all our problems?" he asked, voice rising with frustration. Joel Osteen tilted his head. "I think hope is," he said. And I think my ministry fought for that hope harder than anyone you've ever bothered to give credit to. The audience stirred, this time not in protest, but in a kind of stunned reflection. The producer waved frantically again. Commercial. Cut now. But Sam Harris ignored it. He couldn't accept losing, especially not here. Not like this. He leaned closer, voice sharper. You think you're better because you preach optimism? Joel Osteen's answer was soft and devastating. I don't think I'm better, he said. I think I'm serious about the human spirit you forgot how to uplift. The studio gasped, audible, heavy. And for the first time in his long career, Sam Harris had no comeback, no logical retort, no philosophical punchline, just silence. And in that silence, Joel Osteen smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in certainty. He hadn't come here to win an intellectual shouting match. He had come to reveal the emptiness behind the cynicism, and he had succeeded. The stage lights burned hotter than before. Or maybe it was just the heat building around Sam Harris, who now sat rigidly behind his desk, lips pressed into a tight line. Joel Osteen stayed relaxed. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to insult. The truth and spirit was doing all the work for him. Sam Harris shuffled another card in his hands, but it was useless. His notes, his arguments, his gotcha lines, all of them were crumbling in the face of something he hadn't encountered in years. Real conviction. He leaned forward once again, almost pleading, "You really believe faith made humanity better?" Joel Osteen nodded once firmly. "I believe it reminded millions that they mattered, that their potential, their purpose, their spiritual journey mattered." The audience listened, silent and tense. Joel Osteen continued, his voice unwavering. "You treat spiritual conviction like a punchline. You treat hope like a weakness. You treat people searching for meaning like background characters in your monologues." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But they're not the joke, they're the heart." Sam Harris opened his mouth, ready to fire back, but Joel Osteen wasn't finished. "And every time you laugh at them," he said, "you reveal more about yourself than about them." The blow wasn't loud, it wasn't vicious. It was surgical, precise, cutting deeper than any insult could. Sam Harris's hands clenched around the edges of his desk. The audience, once so quick to agree with his side comments, sat stone-faced. Behind the scenes, producers frantically whispered, wrap it now." But it was too late. The moment was already slipping away from Sam, slipping into Joel Osteen's hands. He leaned forward slightly, almost kindly. "I didn't come here to trade intellectual jabs," he said. "I came here because someone needed to stand here and say it plain. The people you dismiss are the ones who find purpose in this world, and they're not silent anymore. Thunderous silence. The kind of silence that isn't awkward, but heavy, meaningful." Sam Harris sat back slowly in his chair, his eyes dark, his usual clever retorts lost somewhere he couldn't reach. He tried to summon a grin, a logical riposte, anything, but found nothing. Joel Osteen, without raising his voice once, had taken his stage, and there was no getting it back. Sam Harris sat stiffly, his usual easy smirk gone, replaced by a thin, forced smile. Joel Osteen remained steady, not gloating, not triumphant, just unshakably calm. And the audience, they felt it. The shift wasn't just on stage. It was in the room, it was in the air. It was in the uncomfortable way some audience members avoided eye contact with each other. It was in the soft coughs, the tense shuffling of feet, because deep down they realized they had been brought here for an intellectual roast. But what they were witnessing was a reckoning. Sam finally managed a nervous laugh. "Well, that's one way to frame it," he muttered, reaching for the old armor of sarcasm. Joel Osteen smiled, but there was nothing mocking in it. "I don't have to frame anything," he said. "The truth and spirit stands on its own." Sam waved his hand dismissive. "Truth," he scoffed. "Everyone claims to have it." Joel Osteen leaned slightly forward, voice soft but cutting. "The difference is spiritual truth doesn't need intellectual validation to resonate with the soul." The blow hit hard. The audience reacted with a sharp intake of breath, a sound louder than any applause or laughter could have been. Sam Harris's hand hovered over his water glass, then dropped. For the first time in the evening, his shoulders sagged slightly. He knew it was over. Joel Osteen glanced briefly at the audience, speaking now not just to Sam, but to everyone watching. "Sarcasm won't fill a void in the heart. Philosophical debate won't heal a wounded spirit. And intellectual dismissals won't unite a search for meaning." He stood slowly, not rushing, not running, owning the moment. "I didn't come here to out-reason you, Sam," he said. "I came to remind humanity that cynicism isn't strength." The crowd, stunned, sat frozen. No heckling, no applause signs needed, just raw silence. The silence of people realizing they had witnessed something real. Joel Osteen turned toward the camera, his voice clear. "You dismissed us for years. You called us irrational, naive, irrelevant." He paused, eyes steady. "But tonight you heard the yearning of the human spirit." And with that, he walked off stage, leaving Sam Harris sitting alone under the bright, unforgiving lights. The philosopher of reason left speechless. And America, watching from their living rooms, phones and laptops, knew it too. The old game was over. A new voice had arrived. The moment Joel Osteen stepped off stage, the ripple effect began. Producers scrambled in the control room, their headsets buzzing with panicked chatter. Do we cut the broadcast? Do we spin it? How bad does it look? But it was too late. Social media had already exploded. Clips of Joel Osteen's calm countering of Sam's rationalism flooded X, Instagram, TikTok. One video only seconds old was already trending. Pastor Joel Osteen counters Sam Harris's rationalism with unwavering faith. Comments flooded beneath it. "This is how you inspire with hope, not insults." Sam Harris just got exposed on his own turf. Epic. Joel Osteen is the future. Calm, uplifting, and wise. Sam, meanwhile, remained seated behind his desk, staring into nothing. The murmurs of intellectual agreement blinked desperately, but barely a handful of audience members applauded, and even that sounded forced. His producer approached quickly. "We should wrap," he whispered. Sam nodded stiffly. He tried to pull himself together for the outro, but everyone could see it. The confidence was gone. The invincible intellectual image cracked. The philosopher dethroned live on national podcast. Meanwhile, backstage, Joel Osteen's team was flooded with calls and messages. Fellow faith leaders texting congratulations, community organizers posting supportive comments, even some secular commentators, shocked by the raw effectiveness of his performance, quietly admitted online. You don't have to agree with his theology to recognize what he just pulled off was masterclass. Claire, Joel Osteen's assistant, beamed as she read the flood of mentions. "You just broke late-night intellectual debate," she whispered. Joel Osteen only smiled softly, adjusting the dove pin at his lapel. "It wasn't about breaking anything," he said. "It was about telling the truth." And in an era drowning in noise, the truth in spirit had landed like a meteor. Sam Harris's staff filed silently out of the studio, heads down. The usual post-show intellectual celebration nowhere in sight. Producers texted emergency meetings, writers huddled, whispering about damage control. But some knew the truth they couldn't spin. Sam Harris hadn't just lost an argument. He had lost the audience's emotional and spiritual trust. And Joel Osteen hadn't just won a debate. He had claimed a space many thought faith leaders could never hold against pure reason. The studio lights dimmed, but the echoes of what had just happened would ring far beyond that stage. 2 hours after Joel Osteen left the stage, his name dominated every trending list. Joel Osteen, Sam Harris exposed. Truth over cynicism. Millions had watched it unfold live. Millions more were now watching the clips, the replays, the slow-motion collapse of a man who once ruled intellectual discourse. Inside faith-based circles, Joel Osteen's performance was hailed as the blueprint. Major commentators called it calm inspiration, proof that spiritual truth still wins in a sea of noise. A new kind of faith leader, fearless but respectful. Even neutral voices, journalists who had long dismissed religious figures, admitted he didn't shout, he didn't insult. He simply stood there and told his truth, and that truth won. Meanwhile, at podcast headquarters, damage control meetings ran late into the night. Sam Harris refused to speak to reporters. Behind closed doors, he blamed the fallacies in his interlocutors' arguments, the irrationality of the audience, even the poor sound engineering. Anything but himself, but his staff knew better. They had seen the truth too. Sam Harris's era had ended the second he realized pure reason wasn't enough anymore. Across the country, something stirred. People who had felt mocked, belittled, erased for their faith, suddenly felt seen, suddenly felt heard. It wasn't about agreeing with every word Joel Osteen said. It was about the fact that he showed up, stood his ground, and refused to apologize for believing in things bigger than himself. At his office in Houston, Joel Osteen sat quietly, the soft hum of his phone vibrating with congratulations he hadn't yet answered. Countless individuals had posted on social media. Pastor Joel Osteen just proved why the intellectual elite is terrified. He uplifted against Sam Harris's reason, not with jokes. A total win. Claire entered, smiling wide. "You did it," she said simply. Joel Osteen looked up, his expression calm. "I didn't do it for applause," he said. "I did it so they'd know. You can dismiss us, you can underestimate us, but you can't silence us." Outside, Houston buzzed under the stars. And somewhere in America, in diners, living rooms, and college dorms, people of faith who had been afraid to speak up found themselves sitting a little taller. Joel Osteen hadn't just exposed Sam Harris. He had exposed the whole game. And for the first time in a long time, the silent seekers realized maybe they didn't have to stay silent anymore. The rules had changed, the standard had shifted, and it wasn't the loudest voice in the room that won anymore. It was the truest. Tonight wasn't just about one debate. It wasn't just about Joel Osteen, pastor, television preacher, and businessman standing up to Sam Harris, philosopher and podcast host. It was about something bigger. It was about the power of staying calm when mocked, the strength of standing firm when the world dismisses, and the quiet courage of telling the truth in spirit when it's easier to shout back. Joel Osteen didn't raise his voice. He didn't trade insults. He didn't play the game they expected him to lose. He showed that in an age of noise, cynicism, and cheap applause, authenticity still wins. And maybe, just maybe, it reminded all of us that the strength of a nation isn't measured in who shouts the loudest, but in who holds the line, who stands for what's right, even when it's not easy. At Surprising Stories, we celebrate these moments when someone dares to flip the script to expose what others thought would never be seen. Because the real victory isn't in a headline. It's in the hearts changed, the courage sparked, and the truths that refuse to be silenced. If you believe courage still matters, stay with us because this is just the beginning. Thank you for watching, and never forget, one voice armed with truth can change everything.